Hey guys, Abel here, back with another video. First of all, there are some drilling sounds in the background which you can probably hear, but hopefully it's not that bad. I tested it out and it didn't seem to be that bad, so hopefully it will be tolerable. So in today's video, I wanna basically continue where I left off the last time. We talked about body fat percentages and how maybe 15% body fat should be the new 10%, the thing that everybody is striving for. And even if that's not gonna be the case for you, you might end up higher or lower or whatever, but I think at least we should appreciate actually how good 15% body fat can look like and what actually 15% body fat is. So that's definitely not the case where you're too fat. That's a lean and a steady body fat percentage. And probably a lot of people should just shift their kind of reference point, like 5% higher. So that's what we talked about in the last video. And in today's video, I actually wanna talk about signs that you're trying to stay at an unsustainable body fat percentage. Because, it's one thing for me to say that, yeah, I think a lot of people are trying to stay too lean and we should change our perspective. But how can you know if you're actually trying to strive for something unsustainable? And that's an important thing to address because it's not just about the exact body fat percentage. That's going to be individual at the end of the day. However, everybody has a point at which it's just no longer sustainable and it takes just a disproportionately high effort compared to staying a little bit higher in body fat. So instead of talking about specific numbers, I thought I would give you a couple of signs and symptoms that could basically let you decide this for yourself if you're trying to strive for something that is not sustainable. And more specifically, the signs and symptoms I'm going to be talking about are not the well-known, very concrete ones, which I think are more common sense. So, of course, hunger is a big part of this, and lower energy levels and being food focused. These are more known, and I'm going to include those as well, but I'm going to also include maybe some lesser known and more subtle signs that you can pick up on. So first of all, I'm just going to go through it in a more general sense. So what are signs that you are at a proper body fat percentage for you, something that you can sustain in the long term, and that is probably not going to impinge on your well-being. So in a very general sense, a good body fat percentage that is sustainable for you is something that doesn't involve a lot of food focus. You enjoy meals, but you don't obsess over them, and you just don't think about the whole thing that much. Basically, what your body fat percentage is and how you can maintain it is just not something that is crossing your mind a lot throughout the day. Of course, this is all assuming that you didn't just finish a long and serious diet, in which case you will be a bit food focused for a while. But if you have been maintaining your body fat percentage for a while, how lean you are and how you can stay there is kind of like how you can go to the toilet or how you can drink water or breathe. It's something that kind of just happens and you don't need to think about it a lot. A really good and kind of telling sign for me that my body fat percentage is sustainable for the long term is my relationship and kind of enjoyment of meals with different flavor profiles or palatability levels. So when I'm at a good body fat percentage for me, I can enjoy simple whole food meals. On the other hand, I can go out to a restaurant and eat something super delicious, or I can eat some junk food. And while I will think to myself, wow, this is super damn tasty, I won't have this compulsion and this obsession over that food. I can sort of just let it go and I won't have the urge to just eat 15 more. Or even if I do, I can just very rationally think to myself that, well, of course I have that reaction. I mean, this is super tasty, but I can still just sort of move on with my day. If I'm too low in body fat and that's not a sustainable place to be at for me, then my reaction will be very different. This is actually a good place to mention that that's also a good indication for me that I'm too high in body fat. Of course, what I'm about to say is by itself not necessarily an indication that your body fat is at an unhealthy level, but for me, that's a very good indication. That's where I start to notice that, okay, I push my body fat up high here, or I just let it climb up here, and it's no longer benefiting me from a well-being perspective. Like my energy levels, libido, sleep quality, like any of those things are not any better at this point. But one of the main indications of all of this for me is that I no longer enjoy simple whole food based meals. Like everything has to be kind of just a bit overwhelmingly tasty and made in a specific way for me to enjoy it. A steak and potatoes and veggies, that's just, it just doesn't cut it at a certain point. When I start to notice that, that's often the first good indication that, yeah, probably it's time for me to cut down a little bit. Another good indication that your body fat percentage is sustainable for the long term is if you asked yourself the question, could I maintain this body comp without tracking calories and macros if I wanted to stop counting those things? The answer would be yes. When you're too low in body fat, the answer would be no freaking way. Like I would immediately gain body fat, most probably because I would just overeat. When your body fat is at a good place for you, then this should be really no problem. Of course, for some of you, it might be an issue because you have been counting for so long that you feel like you would be lost without it. But still, I think you can kind of get an idea just by thinking of how you feel. If you're, chronically hungry and food focused, then most probably, but still you can sort of have an idea of how that would go, how stopping calorie and macro tracking would go just by thinking of how you feel on a day-to-day basis. If you're always kind of food focused and hungry, then yeah, there's a good chance that not tracking calories and macros could be a problem because you would just always have the urge to eat a bit more than what's required for you to stay at this body fat level. And of course, besides that, there are other indications that are more common sense. You have decent energy levels, your mood is at least not acutely affected a lot by hunger or by your food focus. So you're not having a conversation with someone and then all of a sudden you just get super irritable because you just want to go home and eat finally. You're not waking up in the middle of the night hungry. So, lots of little things like this, but I think you can sort of guess those. So I don't think I need to mention them here. Plus, I'm going to get to them right now because I'm going to be talking about the main indications that your body fat is too low. And that's actually the main thing I want to talk about here. Okay, so I guess the general theme of how you can tell that your body fat is too low and just not sustainable for the long term is that even though you're just trying to maintain, you sort of always feel like you're dieting. There is that extra level of attention and just caution that you have to apply when you're dieting. And basically you have to do the same thing now day in, day out, even though you're no longer in a calorie deficit. If that is the case, yes, probably you can get used to it. People can habituate to anything, but I would say for the very long term, it's most likely not a sustainable thing. It might be sustainable for a summer, but if you're thinking about maintaining this for good, I think you should think about that a little bit. And maybe you should do a bit of a scoring system for yourself like I did in one of my past videos where I basically evaluated how being at around 10% body fat actually felt like, from a scale of 1 to 10. Okay, so this is how my sleep quality is, this is how my libido is, this is how easily I can manage social events, and I scored everything from 1 to 10. Maybe you should do that for yourself. If you feel like, yeah, it's kind of like a diet, even though I'm not dieting. If that is your day-to-day experience, I hate to say it, but there's a good chance that this is not gonna be sustainable for the long term. Okay, next indication, you're never fully satisfied after meals and you kind of always have this urge to eat more and you're always just kind of chronically food focused. So it's a little bit hard to explain, but there is a difference between filling up your stomach and being physically full and actually being satisfied and satiated. In an ideal scenario, you would have both. So your stomach is full enough, so you're physically full, but also you have this pleasant, satisfied feeling. Like, okay, I don't need to eat more. This was just the right amount. I will be good to go for a while. If you're too low in body fat, you never quite have that latter feeling, or you do have it, and those are usually the times when you're overeating. I wouldn't necessarily say that you're chronically hungry, but I would say that you're kind of chronically dissatisfied. You kind of have this chronic feeling of blue balls with food. Needless to say, that is just not a very good way to be for the very long term. Next thing is you have a hard time being really immersed and distracted by any activity, even those activities that you really like. It's basically hard to get into this nice flow state. I don't know if you really like playing video games or something like that, and on a normal day, you could just lie on the couch for hours and just press that joystick and not even realize that 3 hours have passed. Now you have a really hard time with this because food and the thought of eating is always something that is rearing up its head early enough and is going to snap you out of that nice flow state. You have a really hard time with all of this, and that is something that often happens to me when I'm dieting or if I'm keeping my body fat too low. I just have a really hard time being distracted for a long time by anything. And That's part of the reason why often socializing is harder, being around other people is harder. You can just never really fully let go because, I mean, hunger and food, I mean, those are some of the most powerful biological drivers that we have. And when that is, knocking on the door, telling you to do something, man, it's really hard to say no to that. The next thing is social meals, eating out, having a night out with your friends, something like that. All of these things are very hard because you cannot just acutely manage these things. Like, okay, I have a night out or I have this restaurant meal, I'm gonna save up some calories and maybe that's about it. Instead of that, it basically has to be a 3-day plan. So you will have to have a strategy for the day before, the day off, and the day after. So basically every third day, you could have a social event because then you would have enough time to prepare. And that by itself might not be a problem. I mean, most of us don't have some significant social gathering or something every 3 days or more often than every 3 days. But I think living like that, being in a state of constant planning for a meal, I mean, that's not a very pleasant way to be. And, long behold, that's why a lot of people choose to be more lonely when they're trying to be really lean. Which actually brings me right away to the next point, and that is you just notice yourself becoming more introverted, wanting to be alone more, preferring to eat alone for sure, which I'm gonna get to in the next point actually, but you just notice that you used to like people a lot more. I definitely noticed this on myself. I've always been more of an introverted person, but as I got into the fitness game very seriously and I started doing my first serious diets, I definitely noticed that, man, maybe I was introverted, but wasn't this introverted. At times it was actually quite scary. Like I think at one point I went like 3 months without seeing basically anybody except for people in the grocery store or something. When you're doing stuff like that, then yeah, that's an indication that something is just really off. Of course, at times it's actually pretty hard to notice this because you don't tell yourself in these cases, well, I'm dieting, so I'm avoiding people to make dieting easier. I mean, maybe eventually you will tell that to yourself, but I myself came up with all kinds of rationalizations for why I don't like to be around people. It was like, well, people are too much like this, too much like that. We don't have common interests, they are shallow, and to some extent, actually, I do think a lot of those things, but it never bothered me before to an extent where I just avoided people for a really, really long time. When I got into the whole leanness and dieting game seriously, it definitely started happening. So if it's happening to you, maybe, it's time to second guess yourself a little bit. Another weird thing is you're becoming less emotional, and this is definitely something I've noticed repeatedly. Normally, I'm a fairly emotional person. Like, I laugh easily, I cry easily. I mean, in a movie, like all you need to do, it could be the crappiest movie. You just have to show me some really lame scene and put in some sad music and I'm already in tears. When I'm really lean or if I'm dieting very hard, it stops being the case. I actually just said that to my wife the other day that, do you remember that conflict that we had like X time ago? I'm sure that if I was at 7% body fat, then we wouldn't have had that conflict because I just don't have the bandwidth for these trivial things like emotions at that time. I think your primal instincts and your drive, that primal drive for food, seeking fuel is just so much in the driver's seat that you just don't have the bandwidth for these things. So yeah, if you're noticing yourself being much less emotional than before, then maybe it's the body fat, maybe it's the dieting, but yeah, time to second guess yourself once again. The next one is again an interesting one. You prefer to eat alone a lot more. And that is interesting. I think this have multiple factors behind it. I think when you're dieting or when you're trying to stay too lean, you just don't like to be distracted while you're eating. Maybe it's because eating is just such a pleasurable and special event of the day. Like it has such a big significance that you just don't want others to be around to distract you while you're enjoying it. So that could be one aspect. The other thing could be an actual, again, like primal, instinctual thing. Because from some people, I actually heard really weird stories of how they start physically protecting their food from the people that are also in the kitchen or in the dining room or whatever. Like they're turning in a way, positioning themselves in a way so the other person cannot see their food. Again, maybe part of it is that us people into fitness sometimes eat meals that just look really weird and we don't want other people to see it and comment on it. But again, maybe part of it is an actual instinctual, like primal drive that, okay, there is another human here, maybe they would be stealing our food, so let's just make sure that that doesn't happen. If you start noticing these interesting patterns on yourself, then again, maybe that's an indication of something. Another funny one, you spend more time than reasonable looking at low-calorie options and food variants online. I definitely notice this on myself basically every time I'm dieting. Like, maybe I find some low-calorie sauce or something in the store, and then that reminds me that, oh wow, like maybe there are low-calorie variants of this thing and that thing, and you just start Googling and looking up recipes, and maybe you're the kind of person otherwise who just throws something in the microwave and you're done in the kitchen in 1 minute at most each time you eat, but now you're slowly turning into a chef. To some extent, that's normal. In fact, that's even encouraged. I said that before, like developing some basic cooking skills is a great thing if you want to be successful in fitness and you want to stay leaner in the long term. But if that reaches a level that's kind of comical, then, maybe that's an indication of something. I mean, you should be, at the end of the day, able to just enjoy simple meals and just get on with your life after you made a meal and you ate it. But if you're always thinking about, okay, like I had this meal, but how could I make that even higher volume? How could I squeeze in even more eating time into the same amount of calories? Then yeah, I mean, probably there is an issue there, and that issue is most likely that you're just trying to hold on to something that is not sustainable for the long term. The next one is pretty common actually. You have to keep up, or you feel like you have to keep up an unreasonably high step count. So, up to 10,000 steps, it's great. You're gonna be healthier, you're gonna be leaner, it's gonna be great for your mind. 15,000 steps even, that's fantastic. And even, 20,000 steps is completely fine as well if you have a job, for example, that just, necessitates that you walk that much and you move that much. So that's one thing. But if you have to overhaul your entire schedule because you're aiming for a step count which otherwise would not even be remotely feasible for you, then again, you have to ask the question, is this sustainable for the long term? Is it even sustainable for another month? I've tried doing things like that a lot of times in the past, and it honestly doesn't accomplish anything good. The only thing it accomplishes is it makes you hate walking, which otherwise is a great thing. Right now I love going for a walk. Like, it's actually therapy for my mind. It's great, like fresh air, some sunlight, or even if there is no sun out. I listen to a podcast. It can be a great like meditative experience. When I was aiming for close to 20,000 steps every day, and I wasn't even sure if that is really helping, but I was scared to let it go because I was staying lean. I was walking that much, so it's like, okay, what if I lower my step count? Will I have to eat less? Well, that would suck. I hated walking. Like, at a certain time, I just stepped outside and I started walking down the same routes, and it actually made me like sick in my stomach that I have to do this again. And for a long time, I actually hated walking on those same paths because I just had this PTSD from it. So yeah, just aim for something reasonable. Again, try to fit little walks into your daily routine if that is not something that otherwise would happen. Make it sustainable. Really, that is the key. If it's something that you have to have serious efforts to accomplish each day, then, again, how long will you actually keep that up? So yeah, another big indication. If you're tracking your macros, you need to apply a level of meticulousness and just frankly neurosis that is just not reasonable. So weighing out your fruits and veggies. So okay, you weigh out your nuts and rice and things like that, but you also have to weigh out, or you feel like you have to weigh out your cucumbers and tomatoes and apples and things like that. Probably deep down, everybody knows that that's kind of ridiculous. Okay, like this apple is gonna be like 220 grams, the other one might be 250 grams. First of all, is that actually gonna make a difference? Secondly, in the long term, that would actually balance itself out. But if you're in a mindset where you just don't dare to let go of that, then again, that's an indication of something. So yeah, tracking is fine if you enjoy tracking, but if you have to do it in such a neurotic way that is driving you crazy, then again, indication. Being uncomfortably bloated and stuffed is a requirement for you to be satisfied. So unless you're eating to the point in a meal where you're in some level of pain because your stomach is so distended, if that's where you are, then most probably you're trying to stay too lean. The thing is, you will always have some level of distension after a meal if you're eating till satisfaction. I mean, there are very few people who keep a completely flat stomach. So yeah, part of satiety is your stomach being full. But what happens when you're trying to stay too lean is that there is not enough fuel coming in from the actual nutrients in the food. So, because the fats, carbs, protein, like all of these things are too low, a lot of these satiety pathways in your brain are not activated. And the only thing that you can really rely on for satisfaction and satiety, perceived satisfaction, I should say, is your stomach being full. Your stomach being full is definitely one pathway, one of the most important pathways for satiety and feeling full. But there are also other pathways, and that is the actual nutrients that are coming from food. The digestion of fats, protein, carbs, like those actually reaching the bloodstream, that's also signaling satiety for you. Not even the bloodstream, like those are actually activating things in the gut oftentimes. When there is not enough fuel coming in from these things, then the only pathway left for you to experience some level of satisfaction at least is your stomach being full. So what ends up happening is that people try to absolutely max out on that one pathway, so they start eating to the point where they are just in physical pain. This is very, very common. I can't even tell you how many times I've experienced this in my life. So if that's where you are, I mean, do I need to say that that's an indication of something? Okay, this is kind of funny. The last point I wrote up for myself is you wake up in the middle of the night hungry. It's like, really? That's also an indication? Yeah, so that's kind of common sense. So guys, these are just some, more subtle, maybe not as straightforward indications that you're trying to stay too lean. If you're experiencing a lot of these, then there's a good chance that being a bit heavier could actually benefit you. Like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, it's much better to think about things like this and little signs like this instead of specific numbers like 12% or 15%, because people do differ. So some people wrote to me in private, a lot of you commented on my previous video that, well, for me 15% is actually too high. I can easily stay at 10% body fat, and that is completely okay. Like if that's you, then go for it. I mean, I had clients who could stay easily at like 7-8% body fat because food focus, low energy levels, like all of these symptoms that are commonly there when someone is trying to stay too lean, they were just not there for them. So if that's you, completely okay. If for you, like anything under 20% is just unsustainable, it's rare, but there are people like that, then, you gotta go with what you have or what you're being given. So don't think about the specific numbers because, numbers at the end of the day are arbitrary and they're not gonna apply to everybody equally. Think about things like this, do a bit of a questionnaire with yourself, question yourself, and try to be honest with your evaluation. And I think that's going to give you a much better answer than looking for specific numbers like 15% or whatever. So hopefully this video was helpful, and I think I might have another video on this topic. Like I really want to kind of address this in a complete manner, and then I will move on to some other topic. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and yeah, I will see you in the next one.